I'm 79 years old, and 3 months ago my son told me I was too expensive to keep. He sat me down in his corner office with the city view and the expensive furniture, and he explained to me, using a spreadsheet, why keeping me in my own home was financially unsustainable for his family. He had no idea he was sitting in my office, in my building, in the company I built from nothing and that I still own 100% of. He had no idea that every dollar in his bank account came from a business I created before he was born. He had no idea that his corner office, his title, his salary, his career, all of it existed because 43 years ago I took a risk that paid off beyond anything I'd imagined. He thought I was a retired factory worker, a burden, too expensive. And then I showed him the papers. Let me tell you how a father becomes invisible to his own son. How success can blind someone to sacrifice. And how the most expensive lesson I ever taught cost my son everything he thought he had. My name is Vincent Torres. I came to this country in 1968. I was 19 years old. I had $40 in my pocket and a high school education from a small town in Portugal that you've never heard of. I spoke maybe 20 words of English. I worked in a factory for 11 years. Manual labor, assembly line, the kind of work that breaks your body but pays your bills. I saved every penny I could. Lived in a room I shared with 3 other guys. Ate rice and beans and whatever was cheapest at the discount grocery. In 1979, I saw an opportunity. The factory I worked at was throwing away metal scraps, good metal, steel, aluminum, copper. They were paying to have it hauled to the dump because they didn't have the volume to make recycling worth their while. I asked if I could take it instead. They said yes. Didn't care. It was garbage to them. I spent my savings on a used truck. I'd collect the scrap metal after my shifts, take it to recycling centers on weekends. Made maybe $200 extra a month at first. Not much, but it was mine. Within a year, I was collecting scrap from 3 factories. Within 2 years, I quit my job and did it full time. Within 5 years, I had 6 trucks and 12 employees. Within 10 years, I had contracts with 40 companies and a warehouse processing industrial waste materials. By 1995, my company was the largest industrial recycling and waste management operation in the region. We weren't just collecting scraps anymore. We were processing, refining, reselling. We had government contracts, corporate accounts, international buyers. I built it all quietly. Kept my head down, didn't brag, didn't show off, just worked. I met Maria in 1970. She was a waitress. We got married in 1972 in a ceremony that cost $60. Our son Antonio was born in 1980. Maria and I made a decision early on. We wouldn't raise Antonio knowing he came from money. We'd raise him like we were raised. With work ethic, with humility, with the understanding that nothing comes free. So we lived modestly. We had a nice house, but not a mansion. We drove good cars, but not luxury ones. We took vacations, but not extravagant ones. Antonio went to public school. He had chores. He got a part-time job at 16. He never knew about the company, not really. He knew I had a business. He knew I worked in recycling. He thought it was a small operation, a couple trucks, a modest income, enough to be comfortable but nothing special. The company wasn't under my name. It was under a corporate structure. Torres Industrial Solutions, TIS. Didn't sound like a family name. Sounded like any mid-sized company. Unless you looked at the private ownership documents, you'd never connect it to Vincent Torres, quiet man who lived in a modest house and drove a 10-year-old car. Why did we do this? Why keep it secret from our own son? Because we'd seen what happens to children who grow up knowing they're rich. We'd seen kids who never learned to work because they knew they didn't have to. We'd seen families destroyed by entitlement, by laziness, by the assumption that money would always be there. We wanted Antonio to build his own life, to find his own success, to earn his own respect. And then, when he'd proven himself, when he'd shown he had the character to handle it, we'd tell him. We'd bring him into the business. We'd let him know he'd have a legacy waiting. That was the plan. Maria died in 2015. Cancer. It was fast and it was cruel, and it took the love of my life before we could execute the plan we'd spent decades building. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said, "Make sure he's ready. Don't give it to him just because he's our son. Make sure he deserves it." I promised. After Maria died, I accelerated the plan. I arranged for Antonio to be recruited by TIS. He didn't know I arranged it. He thought he got the job on his own merit, which, to be fair, he mostly did. He had a business degree, he had some experience, he interviewed well. But there were 50 candidates for that position. He got it because I told the hiring manager to give it to him. He started in middle management, operations coordinator, good salary, nothing crazy. I watched him from a distance, got reports from his supervisors, watched how he treated people, how he worked, whether he had his mother's kindness and his father's work ethic. For the first few years, I was proud. He was good at his job. He worked hard. He treated people well. He was promoted twice on legitimate merit. I didn't intervene. He earned it. He got married in 2017, a woman named Claire. She came from money, old money, the kind of family that's been wealthy for generations, the kind of people who've never worked a day in their lives but have opinions about people who do. I didn't like her, but Antonio loved her, and I kept my mouth shut. After they got married, things started to change. The visits became less frequent. Antonio used to come see me every week. After the wedding, it became every 2 weeks, then once a month, then every couple months. The calls changed too. Used to call just to chat. Started calling only when he needed something, or when Claire reminded him he should check on his elderly father. His attitude changed. He started talking about money differently, about success, about worth. Started using phrases like maximizing value and optimizing resources. Started looking at life like a balance sheet. Claire never came with him to visit, too busy, or the house was too far, or she didn't feel well. Always an excuse. I started hearing things through the company, nothing direct, but employees talk. Antonio had been promoted to vice president of operations. Big promotion. Impressive title. He'd earned it. But I also heard he'd started treating people differently. Less patience with workers. More concerned with numbers than people. Made a comment in a meeting about deadweight employees we should cut to improve margins. Those deadweight employees were people I'd known for 20 years. People who'd been loyal through hard times. People with families. I had the board push back on his proposal. He didn't know I was behind it. Thought it was the other executives being soft. Then Maria's death anniversary came. 5 years. I thought Antonio would come. We'd always visited her grave together. I waited at the cemetery. He didn't show. Called him that evening. He said he forgot. Too busy at work. Would try to make it next time. He forgot his mother's death anniversary. That's when I knew. He wasn't ready. Maybe would never be ready. The wealth and the title and the marriage to Claire had changed something fundamental in him. But I still hoped. I still believed my son was in there somewhere. Then came the conversation. 2 months ago, Antonio called. Said he needed to talk to me about something important. Could he come by? I said yes. He showed up with Claire. That should have been my first warning. He never brought her to my house. We sat in my living room, the same living room where I'd taught him to ride a bike by practicing balance on the carpet, where we'd watched football games, where Maria had read him bedtime stories. He said, "Dad, we need to talk about your living situation." I asked what he meant. He pulled out a folder, papers, a spreadsheet. Claire sat next to him with her arms crossed and her face set in that expression wealthy people have when they're about to explain why something is actually for your own good. He said, "Dad, I've been looking at your finances. The house is expensive. Property taxes, maintenance, utilities. You're living on Social Security and whatever pension you have from the factory. It's not sustainable." I told him I was fine. I could afford my house. He said, "But for how long? What happens when you need more care? When you can't maintain the house yourself? These costs are only going to go up." I said I'd figure it out when the time came. Claire spoke then. First time she'd said anything. She said, "Vincent, we're trying to help you plan. We can't afford to subsidize your lifestyle indefinitely. We have our own expenses, our own future to think about." Subsidize my lifestyle. I lived in a 3-bedroom house I'd owned for 30 years. I drove a 12-year-old Honda. I did my own yard work. I cooked my own meals. But to them, this was a lifestyle requiring subsidization. Antonio continued. He'd found a nice assisted living facility. Clean, safe, affordable. Only $1,800 a month. I'd sell the house, use that money to pay for it. Could last me 15 years if I was careful. I asked what happened after 15 years. He didn't have an answer for that. I asked, "And if I don't want to sell my house? If I want to stay here?" He sighed, like I was being difficult, like I was a child refusing to eat vegetables. He said, "Dad, I'm trying to be realistic. You're 79 years old. You can't live alone forever. And when you need help, that cost falls on us, on me and Claire. And we can't afford it. We have a mortgage. We're trying to start a family. We're saving for our future. We can't take on the financial burden of your care." Financial burden. I sat there, in my chair, looking at my son, my only child. The boy I'd worked 16-hour days for. The boy I'd built an empire for while pretending to be ordinary so he'd learn to be humble. And he was telling me I was too expensive. Claire added, "We're not saying we don't love you. We're saying we need to be smart. We have responsibilities, and right now you're costing us more than we can afford." I asked how I was costing them anything. I paid my own bills. I didn't ask them for money, Antonio said. "But you will, eventually, when you can't afford the house anymore, when you need medical care, when something happens, and we need to plan for that now." He showed me the spreadsheet. He'd calculated the cost of keeping me in my house versus moving me to assisted living. The assisted living was cheaper, for them, because they wouldn't have to worry about me, wouldn't have to help with the house, wouldn't have to deal with any of it. I looked at my son, at this man I didn't recognize, and I asked him one question. "Did you ever wonder how I afforded to send you to college? How we paid for your wedding? How we always had enough?" He said, "You and Mom saved. You were frugal. You worked hard." I nodded, and I told them to leave. Antonio looked surprised. "Dad, we're not done talking about this." I said, "Yes, we are. Get out of my house." Claire stood up immediately, ready to go. Antonio hesitated. "Dad, don't be stubborn. We're trying to help you." I said, "You want to help me? Then treat me like your father. instead of a line item on your budget. Now get out." They left. I sat in my living room for a long time after they were gone, and then I made a phone call. I called Richard Vaughn, my attorney, the same attorney who handled all corporate matters for TIS, the same attorney Antonio had met multiple times in his capacity as VP of Operations, without ever knowing Richard reported directly to me. I said, "Richard, it's time. Set up a board meeting. All executives, all senior staff, mandatory attendance." Richard asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. The next day I called my financial advisor. I updated my will, made some significant changes, set up a trust, made sure everything was legally airtight. Then I waited. For 3 months I waited. I didn't call Antonio. He didn't call me. The silence was complete. I got reports from the company. Antonio was performing well, hit his targets, closed a major deal. He was being considered for executive vice president, would probably get it. He was thriving in his career while ignoring his father. I heard through the company that he and Claire had started looking at bigger houses, something in the suburbs, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, pool. They were going to make an offer. They were spending money they didn't have yet, assuming promotions and bonuses and the continued success that they thought was theirs by merit. I also heard that in a board meeting, Antonio had referred to some of our longest tenured employees as dead weight we're carrying. Said we needed to cut them to improve efficiency. One of those employees was 68 years old, had worked for me for 32 years, had been at my wife's funeral, had sent flowers when Maria died. Antonio wanted to fire him to improve quarterly numbers. That sealed it. I scheduled the meeting. 3 months to the day after Antonio told me I was too expensive. The email went out from the CEO. Mandatory all-staff meeting. Every employee, every executive, everyone in the building. Friday at 3 p.m., no exceptions. Antonio called me that Wednesday, first time in 3 months. He said, "Dad, how are you?" I said I was fine. He said, "Listen, I'm sorry we haven't talked. Work has been crazy. But I wanted you to know, we're still hoping you'll consider the assisted living option. We found an even nicer place, only $2,000 a month." I said I'd think about it. He said he had to go. Big meeting at work on Friday. Some announcement. He was nervous about potential layoffs. I told him good luck. Friday came. I arrived at the building at 2:30, parked in my reserved spot, the one marked Reserved, Owner. I'd never used it before, always parked in regular spots, but today I used it. I walked through the lobby. Employees recognized me. The old man who came around sometimes. They nodded politely, had no idea who I was. I took the elevator to the top floor. Conference room was packed, 150 people, every chair filled, people standing along the walls. Antonio was near the front, corner seat. Important people sit in corners at meetings. He looked nervous, kept checking his phone. Claire wasn't there. Wives don't come to corporate meetings. I walked in through the back door. A few people noticed me. Confused looks. Why is that old man here? Antonio saw me. His face went confused, then concerned. He got up, started walking toward me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I told him to sit down. "But Dad, this is a corporate meeting. It's employees only." I said, "I know. Sit down." He looked around, embarrassed that his elderly father had wandered into his workplace. He tried to guide me toward the door. "Dad, you can't be here. I'll explain later, but you need to leave." The CEO stood up then, Robert Harrison, I'd hired him 12 years ago. Good man, honest. He knew what was about to happen. Robert said, "Antonio, your father is exactly where he needs to be. Please sit down." Antonio looked confused, looked at Robert, looked at me, sat down slowly. Robert continued, "Thank you all for being here. We have an important announcement today. But first, I'd like to introduce someone. Many of you have seen him around the building. Some of you may have even spoken with him. But I don't think anyone has been formally introduced." He gestured to me. "This is Vincent Torres, founder, owner, and chairman of Torres Industrial Solutions. The man who built this company from a single truck in 1979. The man who signs all of our paychecks. The man who has been quietly watching over this operation for 43 years. The room went silent. Antonio's face drained of color. I walked to the front of the room, slowly. I'm 79. I don't move fast. But I took my time. Let the moment breathe. I stood at the podium, looked out at the faces, some shocked, some excited, some confused. Antonio looked like he might be sick. I said, "Some of you know me as the old man who walks through occasionally. Some of you have never seen me before. That's intentional. I've stayed in the background because I wanted this company to run on its own merit, not on my personality." I looked directly at Antonio. "My son works here, has worked here for 8 years. He's been very successful. He's earned his promotions. He's good at his job. I'm proud of what he's accomplished." Antonio's expression changed slightly. Hope, maybe. I continued. "He got his job here because I arranged it. His first promotion he earned. His second promotion he earned. His third promotion I approved, but he earned it. His salary, his bonuses, his office, his title, all of it comes from a company I built before he was born." The room was frozen. He doesn't know this, or didn't know this, until right now. Because his mother and I decided to raise him without the burden of wealth. We wanted him to be his own man, to build his own character, to earn his own respect. I paused. 3 months ago, my son came to my house. He told me I was too expensive to keep. He showed me a spreadsheet calculating the cost of allowing me to continue living in my own home. He suggested I sell my house and move into assisted living so that I wouldn't be a financial burden on him. People were looking at Antonio now, some with pity, some with disgust, some with shock. He said this while sitting in my living room. The house I bought with profits from this company. He said this while driving a car financed by his salary from this company. He said this while wearing a suit he bought with money from this company. My company. Antonio stood up. "Dad, I didn't know." I held up my hand. "Sit down." He sat. "You didn't know, that's true. You didn't know that your success was built on my foundation. But you did know that I was your father. You did know that your mother and I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. You did know that treating elderly people like they're disposable is wrong." I pulled papers from my jacket pocket. "I've made some changes. First, Antonio, you still have your job. You're good at it. You're valuable to this company. You'll keep your current position and salary. But you've been removed from consideration for executive vice president. You'll go no higher." His face fell. "Second, I've restructured ownership. This company will be transferred to a trust upon my death. 50% to charitable foundations that help the elderly. 50% to our employees through an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. The people who built this company alongside me will own it." Applause started in the back, spread through the room, employees cheering. These were people who'd worked here for decades, people who'd been loyal, people who were about to become owners. I waited for it to quiet down. Antonio, you will inherit nothing. Not the company, not my house, not my savings, nothing. Because you calculated the cost of keeping your father alive and found it too expensive. So I'm calculating the cost of leaving you my life's work, and I find you too expensive. You cost me my son, and that's worth more than $45 million. $45 million. The room gasped. Antonio's face went white. That was the current valuation of the company. He hadn't known. None of them had known. Claire had done research on TIS before Antonio got the job. Market research. She'd thought it was a small operation, maybe worth a few million. She'd been wrong by an order of magnitude. He wanted to know if keeping me was financially sustainable. Let me tell you what's not sustainable. Treating people like balance sheets. Calculating the worth of human beings in dollars. Looking at your father and seeing a burden instead of the man who built the ground you stand on. I folded the papers. This meeting is over. Antonio, I need to see you in my office. My office. I'd said it casually, but everyone heard it. The office he'd been sitting in for 3 years as VP of Operations was my office. I'd just been letting him use it. The room emptied slowly. People congratulating each other about the ESOP. People looking at Antonio with pity or disgust. People giving me nods of respect as they filed out. Antonio stood frozen, in shock. When the room was empty except for him, me, and Robert, I spoke. Come with me. We walked to the elevator, rode to the top floor in silence, down the hall to the corner office, the office with the city view, the expensive furniture, his name on the door. I opened the door. There was a safe behind the painting on the wall. He'd never noticed it. I opened it, pulled out a folder. Inside was the deed to the building. The incorporation papers from 1983. Photos of me with the first truck. Articles about the company's growth. All of it marked with my name. My signature. My face younger but recognizable. I showed him. This is who I am. This is what I built. I kept it from you because your mother and I wanted you to build your own character before you knew you had a fortune waiting. He finally found words. Dad, I didn't know. If you'd known what, you would have treated me better because I'm rich. That's worse, Antonio. That's so much worse. He tried again. I just thought, Claire said, what? That elderly people are expensive? That your father was a burden? Did you even think to question her? He looked down. You forgot your mother's death anniversary. You stopped visiting. You stopped calling. And when you did finally come see me, it was to tell me I cost too much to keep alive. I was trying to be practical. Practical. You were trying to be practical. Let me tell you what's practical. I'm 79 years old. I built a $45 million company. I own this building. I own 3 other properties. I have investments you've never heard of. I don't need your money. I never needed your money. I sat down in his chair, my chair. What I needed was my son. I needed the boy who used to visit every week, who used to call just to talk, who used to care about me as a person instead of as a budget line. He stood there, 6'2", 43 years old, successful by any measure, and he looked small. Can I fix this? I looked at him for a long time. You can try, but the company is gone. That decision is final. You'll work here as long as you want, but you'll never own it. The ESOP is set up. The trust is established. My will is finalized. What about us, you and me? That depends. Do you want to fix us because you love me, or because you just found out I'm rich? He didn't answer fast enough. I told him to get out of my office. He left. That was 3 months ago. Antonio still works at TIS. He comes in every day, does his job. He's professional. But everyone knows. Everyone knows he's the founder's son who called his father too expensive. Everyone knows he lost a $45 million inheritance because he couldn't be bothered to visit his elderly father. Some people feel sorry for him. Most don't. Claire left him 6 weeks after the meeting. Filed for divorce. Apparently, she'd married Antonio thinking he was going to be wealthy. When she found out he'd just lost $45 million through his own cruelty, she was done. The house they were buying fell through. She kept the engagement ring. It was expensive. Antonio has tried to visit me twice. Both times we sat in awkward silence. He says he's sorry. I believe he's sorry he lost the inheritance. I'm not sure he's sorry for how he treated me. Maybe he'll get there. Maybe he won't. But the company is gone either way. The employees are thriving. The ESOP makes them owners. They care about the business differently now. Production is up. Morale is high. People who were thinking about retiring are staying. We're expanding. I come in 3 days a week, sit in my office, make the big decisions, let Robert run the day-to-day. At 79, I don't need to be here every day, but I like it. I like seeing the business I built. I like talking to employees who've been with me for decades. I like being Vincent Torres, the founder, not Vincent Torres, the invisible old man. I got a letter from one of the employees I saved from Antonio's layoff proposal. 68 years old, 32 years with the company. He wrote, "Thank you for remembering that we're people, not numbers. Your son forgot, but you never did." That letter is framed in my office. I think about Maria, about the plan we made to raise Antonio right, about how we thought we were doing it perfectly, about how we thought hiding our wealth was teaching him humility. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we should have told him earlier. Maybe if he'd known where he came from, he would have valued it more. Or maybe he would have been worse. Maybe knowing he was rich would have made him even more entitled. I'll never know. What I do know is this. Character isn't something you can buy. Gratitude isn't something you can inherit. Respect isn't something you're owed. My son had every advantage. Good parents, good education, good opportunities. And he still looked at his elderly father and saw a financial burden. That's not about money. That's about who he became when he thought nobody important was watching. Turns out the most important person was watching the whole time. I'm 79 years old. I'm expensive, apparently. I'm also the founder, owner, and chairman of a $45 million company. I'm also the father who taught my son that success without character is worthless. He's learning that lesson now. Every day he comes to work in my building, draws a salary from my company, sits in meetings where employees talk about their new ownership stake. He's learning. Maybe he'll become the man his mother and I raised him to be. Maybe it's too late. But he'll learn it without my fortune, because you don't get to calculate the cost of the person who built your world. Not while they're still alive to remind you who really owns everything.